Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Film Buds podcast. This is our 63rd bonus show, and my name is Henry. This time around, I'm going to be talking about the films of director Zack Snyder. So this episode is going to cover Dawn of the Dead, his remake, Legend of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole, Sucker Punch, Army of the Dead, and then his new film, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. And then I'm also going to be talking about the Army of the Dead spinoff, as well as being produced by Zack Snyder, called Army of Thieves, which is also on Netflix along with Army of the Dead and Rebel Moon. First of all, I have done all of his DC films on the DC Extended Universe shows Part 1 and 2, so you can check out all of those films there. I also did Watchmen on the DC Standalone film bonus show and 300 on the Frank Miller show. So I didn't want to have too many overlaps, considering I've touched on all of his other movies in those shows, so check out those episodes if you want to hear reviews of that. This time around, I'm going to be talking about everything else, mostly his standalone, unattached films, which I think works better anyways, considering it'll allow more discussion on Zack Snyder himself as opposed to the DC universe as a whole or anything like that. So, as always, thank you for downloading, for donating, subscribing, however it is that you got this show. We really do appreciate it, and we hope you'll check out our regular show if you haven't already, and make sure to subscribe to the Bandcamp page if you've not yet. So, Zack Snyder is someone who I think when I saw 300, as I talked about on the Frank and Miller show, 300 was the first film that I saw of his, and it's one that, to repeat myself, I think it was the one that every guy I knew was in love with. Like, we watched it at every party, and I didn't know who Zack Snyder was at the time. I was just too young to really take any interest. It was just a cool movie to me, but that's definitely one that has always stuck with me because I will never forget the impact that movie had on me, on everyone I knew, like all my friends, and then also I'd say on just movies in general. That was a huge, looking back now in retrospect, that definitely had quite the impact, and Zack Snyder has just had a huge impact in general. I remember just recently, Christopher Nolan has come out and said what a genius Zack Snyder is. And there's an interview, I think, with Christopher Nolan talking about how much he loves Zack Snyder's style, his passion, his love for filmmaking that's clear in his films. And that's one reason that I love Zack Snyder, and that I'll touch on in just a little bit. But he's one that definitely is not for everyone. He definitely has some duds here and there. He doesn't have, a lot of masterpieces under his belt, but he's someone who, like Christopher Nolan has just come out and said, and watching Rebel Moon for the first time just recently, I do see his love and his passion for filmmaking while watching his movies, which is not always the case with blockbuster filmmakers who claim to love movies. For example, I would take a Zack Snyder epic over a Michael Bay epic any day of the week. I think Zack Snyder, while he can be showy and flashy and stylish and all that, he still has, when it comes to characters, a lot of the times, a modesty, a humanity, whereas someone like Michael Bay, who, I'm not saying he doesn't love making movies or loves movies, but his films, in comparison to big action directors, he comes across much more egotistical, much more repetitive, much more showy in his characters and his ideas and themes. And so Zack Snyder, while he definitely has some flaws, maybe retreads certain materials too much, to me, watching Rebel Moon, watching Army of the Dead, and his other films, I see why he wants to make movies the way he does and how he wants to entertain an audience, the things he loves to inject, the kind of movies that he grew up watching. I see all of that in his films. Doesn't always mean it's a 5 out of 5, but it's something that I really do appreciate, and I feel like I am getting more and more while I'm watching his films. And so he's one that he is an auteur, as with all of these filmmakers that I'm touching on in these bonus shows. And I would take an auteur, a flawed auteur film, over a middle-of-the-road, safe, flavorless film any day of the week. And so Zack Snyder definitely is an auteur, and there's no doubt, for better and for worse, you can say that he has had quite the impact on Hollywood, especially when it comes to action, comic book films, anything in that nature. You can see that across so many different genres and directors and films and franchises. Yeah, well, with that being said, let's get into the first film.